Welcome back. Another episode of Studio Time. And in this Studio Time, again, we're going to discuss another Mortal Engines character. Actually, this character is interesting, and I can say this much. This character is a weapon. So it's not actually a person, it's a weapon. And this weapon has the ability to take out the whole world, if you will. Again, we were sitting here on the couch talking with everybody, and that is Peter Jackson, Fran Walsh, and Christian Rivers. We were sitting here discussing what needed to happen for this character. And I did write something for this weapon. Medusa is the name. And so we're discussing in this Studio Time the theme for Medusa. And I had a version of it, and I played it to them, and they were scratching their heads, and they weren't quite happy with it. And I started to explaining why they were not happy with it. So they wanted something that sounds dangerous, but then at the same time has a godlike quality to it. And then at the same time, it has a sort of beautiful aspect to it as well. Now, this sounds really weird when I say this, but try to follow my brain here. What Peter, I would think, was trying to say in that meaning. If you look at a nuclear explosion, it's terrible, and if you look at fire, it's terrible. We just had terrible fires here in California with many people dead and losing their homes and all whatnot. And it's terrible. It's scary, and especially if it's on such a big scale, like a nuclear explosion, it has like this biblical effect. It affects such a big portion of lands, but at the same time, it looks very impressive too, and to a certain extent, beautiful. If you look at some of these wildfires, when you see pictures of it, it's terrifying completely. Yes. But there's something that's really beautiful about it too, on the look of it. And that's the weird thing that goes back and forth with this theme. And that was very important. And especially when you see this weapon in action in this film. And so these were elements that were very important. So for this, I wanted to play with a melody that was kind of a little weird and off-putting. So I'm actually constantly switching between scales. There's a later episode in the future where I'm going to talk more about that regarding this. But technically, I'm allowing myself to use like certain types of notes. So when I open up a cello, and here we have the cello, these are the notes that I'm using. So now I'm back at the top. So what am I actually using? So I'm using the C. I'm using the C sharp, A flat, E natural, E flat, E natural. Sorry, F, G, G sharp, B flat, A sharp, whatever you want to call it, B, C. So when you use so many notes in one octave, for the theorist among you, I never know exactly what to call the notes because they're constantly half step apart with so many notes in the same octave. So if you do have the perfect solution for that, please leave a comment below. But for me, I'm just going, I could call this D flat because it's the next step in the scale. And I would call this E flat, that would be the next step on the scale. But how would you then call the E natural? Would you call that an F flat because it's the next step in the scale? Or would you call it E natural? If you, the real theorist among you, please leave a comment below. I would be interested to know what that potentially would be. Now, these were the notes that I've given myself to write the theme with. So there's a couple of really interesting chords you can make with this. Obviously, C minor, C major. Let's call it C sharp diminished. Then you can do E flat minor, E flat major. E flat diminished. Then you can do F minor. You can do G minor, G major. You can do A flat minor, A flat major. You can do B flat minor, and then we end on a B, and then you could do you have the which is the top of the G7 chords, the B, D, F, and B diminished, or B G natural in an inversion. So it actually gives you a couple of really interesting chords to play with. And the more important thing for me was to find a melody that then I could move to the violins, then I could move to the choir, then I could move to the super top violins, but just keeping the counterpoint writing in check what's going to happen. So when we start this thing, I'm going to play the MIDI version of this. This is something that I'm actually particularly fond of. I've been doing this for a long time, pretty much on all the movies that I worked on, which is writing, as you can see here on the screen, just like super fast notes. And what you do when you record it, you know what? Let's talk about that when we go to the actual live recordings. Let's just keep it at super fast notes that need to be played, and then we'll explain what we did later. So let me play this thing, and then the celli are coming in, the basses are coming in, and let's just play this thing. So that was a statement on the cello octave, and now the basses drop an octave below. Now what's interesting to point out here is that during the live recording, Conrad and I discussed late at night over a drink at the bar of the hotel. It's like, it would be really great to have the lower woodwinds play along with that lower theme. So it's not here in the programming, but we actually did it during the live recording. When we get to that, I'll play that as well. So now we go to a pedal note, and now the octave is being, the theme is being played by the viola and the cello an octave higher, and then it moves on to the strings, and then the choir joins us as well. So let me open up that MIDI part so you can look at it. So that was that theme. What I find really nice is that you go through all these different octave ranges, and it gives you such a different atmosphere every time when you hear it again. So what I, for instance, like here is like if we go to the violins, you hear the. You hear that, but then there's a counter line underneath when it lands that does the. So you echo that same melody again. So we see that here, that the first statement is being played in the violins, and then we have the statement here in the cello, and that idea keeps following throughout that piece when it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So brass is joining us here too. Choir is joining us. So if we just opened up the brass and the strings, and we just were to just solo that section on its own. So this is still MIDI we're in. So you hear all these really nice clashes between the strings and the brass and the choir, and I'm a really big fan of like sometimes when it really clusters. Yet where the melody takes place, there's there's a good amount of space for the melody to really pick up, so it doesn't get lost completely in the clusters. Also, the melody plays in octaves here, and the notes that I picked are kind of weird. So. It also gives you the freedom to come up with weird chords that actually really help you do certain things. Some of the notes that you actually see here are not notes that are being played. These are actually key switches. So this might potentially throw you off here, which is the A flat here against the C. The A flat is actually a key switch. In an episode that comes later, we'll talk about expression maps, because in the new template that I built, I'm only using expression maps and not key switches. But separate episode about that. Okay, so now that we've played the MIDI bits, and as you can see, there's not a whole lot there. I mean, there's timpani, some timpanis, and a low drum. There's a little bit of sound design, which are these 3 tracks here, and the rest is just strings and choir and brass. So there's not a whole lot happening in this cue, yet it has a profound effect musically when you hear it, and especially against the picture. Okay, so let's now close this session, and we're going to open the mix session, and then we're going to continue. And we're back with the mix session. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the real live recording that we did, and as you can see here, there's not a lot of tracks in here, again, because this is what I said earlier on, a very relatively simple cue. It was 1 take on the strings, 1 take on the brass, and then the choir, the solo soprano, and a few samples, the timpani, and a couple of other things. So not a whole lot there. But I do want to talk about this one aspect of the strings. Remember that I played you earlier that bit with the really fast string lines. So the notes that I put in there are the notes that I want to hear eventually when it's being played, but you're not going to play it literally like that, the way that it was programmed. So what we would do is we would put all these notes that I picked, and we put like a box around it on paper, and basically we'll sort this out like during the recording. So this was like a separate take. So what we did is let's try to find like a really nice sound with the whole string section to get that out. How would you do that? So what we did is a couple of violin players would actually play the notes like really fast with like almost like measured tremolo, really quick spiccato, whatever you want to call it, just really quick bouncing of the strings, playing these notes. So that was like 20%, 30% of them. Then the violas, for instance, were a combination of actually playing the note and a combination of artificial harmonics. They would play those notes as a cluster, but then legato, very, very quiet. Then some of the other violin players would have their mutes on, and we would say, okay, that desk is going to pick that note, that desk is going to pick that note, and that desk is going to pick that note. And they would like tremolo into the one and then stop, tremolo into the one and then stop. And other ones would tremolo into the two, into the three, you know, just like whatever you wanted. And then we did similar things with the basses and the cello, primarily harmonics on the chases and basses and the cello, to give that really eerie quality. So we recorded this like a couple of times with all kinds of different articulations. And I want to play you the two that I picked actually to work with. So this is one. Let's solo this. I didn't do this right. Let's do this again. So here we go. This is one. Really nice quality to it. I put a lot of washy effects on it to get that effect even more so. Now let's pick the second one. Let's see what that one sounds like. So here you hear like actually a little bit more ponticello almost. What you saw me do here on the right on the mixer window is that because I mixed this in ever so quietly into the track, is that I took the VCAs off read and I could really boost now the signal to let you hear what it actually was doing. I have my VCAs open here on the right. I'm going to play this thing one more time from beginning to end, and now you're going to actually also see on the right, like the automation that I did with the VCA. So you could see how drastic I went with it. Let's see, what else do I want to point out before we play it? Yeah, let's just listen to the brass because they sound so good. I want to tell you a little bit about how we recorded the brass in a bit. Here we go. Very, very great sound. So what I actually did with the brass recordings, because I wanted that big setting that I talked in the first video about with the London suite, I really wanted that really big brass sound. But to find 50 or 55 brass players is pretty hard in New Zealand, and it's pretty hard anywhere in the world to get a sound like that. But we were able to do it to record one thing with a big group, which was 32 players. If I remember it correctly, it was 12 horns, it was 12 tenors, it was 3 bass bones, 2 tubas and 3 trumpets, and that was it. So that was our big section. And then we did smaller brass recordings as well, which would have 3 trumpets, 3 tenor bones, and 6 horns. And what we would do is we would double the second smaller section would double the big section twice to give that really big effect. We also had different players for that. So it gave it a really natural feeling, and you get that idea of really, you know, big sounding brass. So that's when you see here like 3 takes. So this is, I think, the big section, which it is. And then here we hear the 2 smaller ones. And that's small 1, and this is small 2. Oh no. This is just the lower brass. Now I know it. We recorded the horns separately. Sorry, let me rephrase this. We recorded the the horns separately, the 12 horns, and then we doubled it with the extra trumpets and the extra tenors to get a little bit more bite in that note. And then the lower brass we recorded separately. But on some of the other cues, we actually did what I just said. So sorry, it's already been 5 months ago when we recorded it. So you forget like certain details, but now it's all coming back to me. So I remember it now. And then obviously we see the choir here. I want to feature the choir on their own because they sound so incredibly fantastic. Really amazing sounds. Anyway, so let's now play this whole thing, how it turned out. So we start with the kind of shimmery string recordings that I talked about earlier, how we made them. And then the theme starts coming in, and then the brass and the choir comes in, and it gets like really big and exciting. And I'm gonna leave the VCAs on the right page so you can actually look on what's going on. While I'm doing that, I'm also will open of the strings. Here again, we see the BX channel being used for this particular movie on each channel. Again, with the randomizing function that we talked about. Oh, listen, I might not have randomized this for this particular cue. So let's just do it. And now we are randomized. So maybe it now sounds completely different than we intended. Let's just see. So let's just play this thing from beginning to end. So that was a live recording of Medusa. So I want to point out a few things. Is that this was the original theme that I wrote for Medusa, and then the cue that you saw last, which was Hester's theme in the 2M10A. You already heard this theme in different reiterations. So if you want to hear again, like what a reiteration of that theme was, just go check out the previous episode close to the end where you hear these themes come back. So even though this was a suite, it actually appears like this in the film on 2, 3, 4 occasions in this exact version. Just a little shorter, a little longer, depending on the cue, but it appears like this in the film. And the thing that we saw here is the live choir recording, the live brass recording, how I stacked them up. Again, with a very good trick that I learned from Conrad, is that if you want a little bit more power in the top horn lines, just put some trumpets and some tenors on it, and they will give you that brassy bite, but also emphasize the tone more. And we talked about the strings, so we talked about how to create these shimmer kind of strings, how we do that in the recording room. And we discussed a little bit about like what I do with the VCAs. And then obviously, you know, we talked about the console E of BX, like how I randomize the channels and a little bit of processing on there. I do want to point out though, is that once I'm happy with the sound for the strings, I pretty much keep that the same throughout the whole movie, and the same with brass and the same with woodwinds. And dubbing engineers who will mix the final version of the film will love you for it, because if they want to tweak a little bit overall, they don't need to do it per cue. They can just do it once, and then it's going to be sounding the same for everything after that. So I would highly recommend that once you have a sound for your film or a sound for your documentary or TV show, whatever you work on, don't change too much per cue. Just keep like things the same throughout a movie or a TV show. So if a mixer wants to make a final adjustment that your strings were not bright enough or maybe a little too bright, he can make like a little adjustment on the board. And because the strings sound the same throughout the film, it will then work out with the processing that he wants. So I think that's it for this episode. I hope you liked it, and I see you soon with another Mortal Engines episode. See you soon.